My name is Andy Smith. I'm Reader in 19th Century English Literature here in the School of English at the University of Sheffield, and I co-direct with Professor Angela Wright the Centre for the History of the Gothic. I research on 19th century Gothic fiction and write about it in a variety of different contexts. My first book, Gothic Radicalism, actually looked at the philosophical context of the Gothic in the long 19th century, going from Burke to Kant to Freud, and an idealist tradition, and how that gets reworked by a range of Gothic writers. I've also written a book called Victorian Demons, which is about the fin de siècle Gothic and about medical contexts. I've written a book which is the history of the ghost story from 1840 to 1920, and more recently I've written a book called Gothic Death, a literary history 1740 to 1914, which explores representations of death and dying in Gothic narratives between that period. My current research is looking at the Gothic produced during the First World War and just after the First World War, looking at how a Gothic language also infiltrates memoirs about World War I, as well as looking at some ghost stories which were produced during the period. This is partly because the two previous books that I've written both stopped just before the First World War, and this is an opportunity for me to redress that omission and explore rather more fully how it is that the Gothic played a role in thinking about death, dying and mourning during World War I. Well, why I think the Gothic's important is because I think it provides us with a way of looking at how certain kinds of political realities were developed during certain periods. It's often a commonplace to think about the Gothic, to consider it as a form which looks at emotional excess or psychological dramas, but I think there is this other kind of narrative which is about what it is that the Gothic decides to define as evil, what it is, as it were, that it wishes to cast out. And that idea of casting out or othering is very much a political language, not just a psychological language. So I think the Gothic actually provides us with an alternative way of thinking about political dramas within certain periods. Well, my favourite Gothic writer changes probably in relation to who I'm working on at any one time. At the moment, my favourite Gothic writer is M.R. James. I find M.R. James a very interesting and slightly frustrating writer. There's always this extraordinary disjunction between the cultured, urbane voices, often of his leisured academics, and the extraordinary kinds of violent dramas that they're confronted by. But why I find James particularly interesting at this point is that his writing so often actually reflect on ideas about mourning and about loss, which are about the First World War, particularly his writing in the 1920s. And we have to bear in mind his involvement with a certain war commission, which involved him putting together the memorial screed that was sent out to the families who had lost people fighting in the war. He also constructed war memorials at Eton and at Cambridge. So he's acutely conscious of the war, and there are ways in which thinking about the war, thinking about the dead, intrude into his ghost stories. Please keep an eye on the website for the Centre of the History of the Gothic. We list all kinds of activities that we're up to there. We very much welcome people joining us to get involved with various things, so please do keep an eye on the website and drop us a line if you want to. Thank you.